So guys, it was a Saturday in mid-November, all the way back in 2001. The very next day, I was going to be buying a brand new video game console for the first time with my own money. Now you see, I had set aside that money specifically for this purpose. The very next day, that Sunday, the Nintendo GameCube was set to launch in North America, and I was so freaking pumped, man. Wave Race Blue Storm, Luigi's Mansion, and then the title that I was actually looking forward to most of all, Star Wars Rogue Leader Rogue Squadron 2.
Use your harpoons and tow cables. Go for the legs. It might be our only chance of stopping them.
I'd read everything I could about the upcoming console and even played one in the weeks leading up to launch at a Toys R Us kiosk. Now, I'd been a Nintendo kid growing up, but instead of going with the 64, I actually went with the PlayStation instead. Now, I loved my PlayStation, don't get me wrong, but this meant I missed out on games like Mario 64, the original Smash Bros, and Ocarina of Time. Also, my house was strictly a one-console household. I had to think very carefully with every generation about which console I was going with next. And I have to say, it looked like the GameCube was going to be the best console for me at the time. Looking back now, I can say that there will never be another video game console quite like the Nintendo GameCube. It was more powerful than a PS2, cheaper than both PS2 and Xbox, and it was backed by some of Nintendo's best games in years. It also had one of the best and most comfortable controllers ever made. Many Smash Bros. Players still prefer it to this day. And yet, the GameCube actually finished third place that generation, far behind Sony and the PS2, and just behind Microsoft's new Xbox. In fact, at that time, it was actually Nintendo's worst-selling home console ever. Believe it or not, they weren't growing the home console market at all. They'd seen a steady decline in their base with every new generation. It was actually the failure of the GameCube that ultimately forced Nintendo to completely reinvent their approach to hardware. Personally, though, GameCube is one of my favorite consoles ever made. And it's not just me. I hear so much nostalgia and reminiscing from anyone who owned one of these back when they first came out. And I gotta say, even now, looking back, it is really hard to believe that it failed like it did. I mean, this is a console that had exclusives like Metroid Prime, Mario Kart Double Dash, Wind Waker, and of course, Super Smash Bros. Melee. You know, in many ways, you could say the GameCube had everything. So what exactly happened? Even looking back now, I don't regret my purchase at all. Nintendo got so many things right with the GameCube. This was a device focused almost solely on the games themselves. Whereas PS2 had the extra benefit of doubling as a DVD player, and trust me, that was a huge deal back then. You also had Microsoft innovating with Xbox Live and bringing online gameplay to consoles in a big way. Nintendo, on the other hand, designed a device that was unashamed in its focus solely on video games. Even the console's design and its built-in handle emphasized Nintendo's mission and how they hoped to differentiate the GameCube from the competition. It had more power than PS2 and promised faster loading times thanks to its mini-disc format. And that controller, man, that controller. The first time I held it, admittedly, I did think it looked a little strange, this big green A button, the kidney bean, X and Y buttons. But then when I played Rogue Squadron for the first time, suddenly it just all made sense. Everything fell exactly where my thumbs naturally wanted to go. You see, Nintendo completely rethought the idea of what makes a good controller after the mixed reaction to the 64 controller. With the GameCube, they designed the button layout in a way that would make it tailor-made specifically for their biggest titles, placing a big focus on how so many games were designed at this time. There was almost always a face button action that you needed to use more than any other, which is why the A button was the largest of the four primary face buttons. Then slightly off from that, you had the circular but much smaller B button. This was often used for secondary actions or special attacks. Then you had the kidney bean-shaped X and Y buttons just above the A button. These were positioned so you could easily roll your thumb off the A button and quickly reach either of them. The analog triggers also felt responsive and satisfying, perfect for games where you needed granular levels of control, like with Super Mario Sunshine and the Flood Water Pack. Then of course you had Melee, and Smash players grew to love this Cube controller so much so that Nintendo has continued to give us a way to use it, even on modern systems all these years later. In addition to the controller, the GameCube also launched comfortably below both competitors with a $199 price point in the US. Not only that, it launched with a number of standout first-party titles and also had plenty of third-party support. The N64 may have had Mario at launch, but overall, the GameCube's lineup had both a better variety and a better quantity of games overall. And just within a few weeks from launch, they dropped Super Smash Bros. Melee, which improved on the original in every way. Even looking back now, the GameCube had some truly fantastic games throughout its entire life. Looking at only first-party titles, we got not one, but two Metroid games, two Pikmin games, two Star Fox games, including one that was a completely original and bold new direction for the series. The GameCube is what brought us the original Animal Crossing, at least to the US. It gave us Mario Kart Double Dash, Zelda Wind Waker, and even an M-rated cult classic with Eternal Darkness. The third-party lineup wasn't nearly as robust as what Sony had with the PS2, but GameCube support here was far better than what they had with 64. They even managed to secure some exclusives like Tales of Symphonia, Resident Evil 4, which was part of the infamous collection of titles from Capcom referred to as the Capcom 5. These were 5 titles that were originally announced as exclusive to the GameCube. They also had support from third-party sports titles this generation, a very key demographic, especially here in the US. Now, me personally, with all of those games, I was more than satisfied with my GameCube purchase. Many of the games that I played during those years are still some of my favorite games ever made. Metroid Prime, Resident Evil 4, Melee, Wind Waker. Getting to experience each of those for the very first time as they came out is something I'll never forget. Each of them completely blew me away in ways that I didn't expect. Now, while I and many others were perfectly content with our purchase, none of those games, exclusives or not, were able to save Nintendo from third place. It certainly wasn't for lack of trying, but the GameCube's problems actually started long before it ever even hit the store shelves. To understand what killed the GameCube, we need to rewind back to 1995. You see, Sony entered the gaming industry as the underdog. Of course, by now, we all know about the breakup between Nintendo and Sony that led to the original PlayStation. They beat Nintendo and the N64 to the market, went with CDs instead of cartridges, which offered way more advantages for developers, and overall, they just had more developer-friendly policies to win over third parties. Plus, you had all these gamers who grew up with Mario and Zelda, now they're getting older. They're looking for fresh new gaming experiences with deeper stories and more mature themes. And Sony was right there at just the right time to meet those needs. They had exclusives like Final Fantasy VII, Tomb Raider, Gran Turismo, Resident Evil, Metal Gear Solid. Heck, even I went with the PS1 over the N64. It was really just a perfect storm for Sony, and they absolutely dominated this generation. The original PS1 would go on to sell north of 100 million units, making it one of the best-selling consoles of all time and far surpassing the N64's 32 million. Whereas Nintendo had been struggling to grow the home console market, Sony blew it wide open. Now this repeats again the next generation.
PlayStation 2.
PlayStation 2, newest, fastest video game system ever.
Once again, they beat Nintendo to market, only this time they had all that momentum from the PS1 and they carried it right into the launch of the PS2. Now, all the while, you had Nintendo allocating numerous resources to innovating in the portable gaming space as well as the home console space. They actually had far more success hitting the mainstream here on portables than they ever did with home consoles. The original Game Boy and Game Boy Color family of handhelds sold more than 118 million worldwide. But you see, all of this handheld success, it actually split Nintendo's focus. In fact, they released 2 brand new systems the very same year. As they were preparing to launch the GameCube, they were also actively supporting their recently released Game Boy Advance, which had just debuted in June of 2001, 5 months prior to the launch of the GameCube. So here you have Sony riding high on all the success from PS1 right into the launch of the PS2. This was in the year 2000, by the way, a full year before GameCube and Xbox. Then at that exact same time, Nintendo is splitting their resources to focus on the launch of 2 new devices. PS2 also had the added benefit of backward compatibility with the massive PS1 library. The N64 wasn't as successful, plus the GameCube was not backwards compatible. PS2 also doubled as a DVD player, and to anyone who didn't grow up in this era, it may seem like the DVD player was just a small perk to something that was mostly focused on gaming, but let me tell you guys, the inclusion of a DVD player was a huge deal here. Keep in mind that we didn't have streaming services like we do now. No Netflix, no Amazon Prime. DVDs were absolutely a massive boost in quality for watching movies at home. Not only that, most standalone DVD players at the time cost as much or even more than the PS2's $299 launch price. It really was a serious benefit that absolutely made a difference here. Then to that, you can add all the third-party support that Sony had during the PS1 era. It carries over here. Grand Theft Auto 3, Final Fantasy X, and Metal Gear Solid 2, they were all massive hits on Sony's new system, and they did not appear on the GameCube. Sony launching a full year ahead of its rivals was enough to give the PS2 a 10 million unit head start. Now, I fully admit I desperately wanted a PS2 when it launched. I can remember going to my friends and playing the new Madden, absolutely blown away at the leap in graphics. $299 was out of my family's price range though, so they encouraged me to save my own money and see what was out there the next year. Well, despite the PS2's success, I became more and more interested in the GameCube leading up to its launch. For me and how old I was at the time, its games seemed like a much better fit for what I would enjoy, and it also helped that it was $100 cheaper than the PS2. By the time the GameCube did launch though, Nintendo was already in a hole. They'd lost the previous generation, Sony had a massive head start, and now you had Microsoft entering the picture, promising better graphics plus online multiplayer. Looking back, you can easily say that the GameCube was doomed from the start. The Game Boy Advance, on the other hand, proved that Nintendo still had massive appeal with a younger demographic, thanks in large part to Pokemon. And because the Game Boy Advance was so cheap, even older gamers who still had a soft spot for Nintendo could get their fix on the go. While the GameCube didn't have a dominant console that it could use as momentum, the Game Boy Advance did. The fact that it was backwards compatible played a huge role in the system's success. Oh, and the GBA was also the only place that you could play the new mainline Pokemon games, a series that had already become a worldwide phenomenon. Now, Nintendo realized this and tried to help both systems with cross-promotion. They even made a piece of hardware known as the Game Boy Player, which physically connected to the bottom of a GameCube. This gave the system the ability to play Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games through the GameCube onto a television. Pretty cool accessory even to this day. They're kind of hard to find though, and they're usually not very cheap. There was also a Game Boy Advance link cable, which opened up special features in certain games, and yep, I actually had one of these. I remember using it in a Harry Potter game, and I'm pretty sure you could use it as a map in a Splinter Cell game. Commercially though, all of this was for naught when it comes to the GameCube. And as they entered that next generation, Nintendo had to make a choice. Double down on competing with Sony and Microsoft on power and features, pull out of the home console market altogether and focus only on their handhelds, or completely reinvent what a console could be. Their leadership at the time had to reevaluate what it meant to be in the home console space. They knew they had to do something completely different, which is why they chose reinvention, or, as they would say at the time, a revolution. Under President Satoru Iwata's leadership, they leaned into what they called a blue ocean strategy. Instead of competing in the red ocean with Sony and Microsoft, Nintendo sought a new audience of non-gamers. They focused on novelty over power with the Nintendo Wii, which was barely more powerful than the GameCube. Thanks to its innovative motion controller, though, the pivot to the Wii paid off in a big way. They'll never go back to the GameCube strategy of trying to compete in raw power and graphics. Nintendo is thriving to this day because they learned to stop competing on specs, and they started leaning more into innovations, leaning into the things that set them apart from the competition. Now, I have to be honest here, I bought a Wii at launch and had a blast, at least initially. It was awesome to see my family get into games in ways that they never had before, but for me, this was the generation where Nintendo started to lose me. The GameCube was undoubtedly a commercial failure, especially compared to the Wii. But for me, personally, the GameCube is the one that resonated more with me. It's the one that I look back on more fondly. Now, I'm not going to say that Nintendo should have stuck with their old strategy because, let's be honest, they definitely wouldn't be here today if they had. The Wii saved Nintendo, no question, but something was also lost in that transition. All these years later, as I watch my kids grind through Fortnite battle passes while I scroll through hundreds of games I'll never have the time to play, I'm realizing something new about the GameCube and how it represents something that we can never get back. You know, the GameCube, it was the last time that a console just let you play. No social features begging for attention, no storefront hawking DLC, no Battle Pass FOMO, no games as a service or subscription services with more games than you'll ever legitimately have time to play. You put in a disc and you played that game. That's it. When you were done, you took out the disc and you put in another one. That simplicity, that purity of gameplay is gone forever. Nowadays, we spend half our time managing our library, sorting through our backlogs, navigating through digital storefronts, trying to figure out what editions offer what and whether and how long we should wait to buy a game before it will be in a state that's playable. Those growing up in this era of games will never be able to fully understand what they missed out on. Those of us who grew up with the GameCube, though, we're part of the last generation that will be able to remember what games were like back then. Back before the internet and before social media changed everything. Look, I'll always love the GameCube for the memories, for Metroid Prime's atmosphere, countless Smash Brothers sessions, for Wind Waker's artistic courage, for that perfect controller, but now I love it for something even deeper. You see, the GameCube represents something that we can never get back. The last time you could experience games without storefronts vying for your attention, without battle passes demanding your time, without notifications pulling you away from the world you're trying to get lost in. You could say that the GameCube was the last pure gaming console, and honestly, I don't think we'll ever see another one like it again. Now, one of the games that I enjoyed the most on that system was Metroid Prime. If you enjoyed that series as well, then check out the video over on the right side of your screen now for a full deep dive into the Metroid series. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.